The rain against the glass of the Platinum Wing atrium didn't sound like weather. It sounded like static, a constant, low-frequency hiss that Alara Vance had learned to tune out over 3 years of night shifts. She stood behind the marble reception console, her spine perfectly straight, a line of tension holding her shoulders back against the fatigue that always tried to creep in around 3 a.m. She glanced down at her left wrist. The silver analog watch she wore on the inside of her arm ticked away the seconds, the metal cool against her pulse. 3:24 a.m. The lobby was empty. It was designed to look empty even when it wasn't. The lighting was amber and low, smelling faintly of sanitized lavender and old money. This wasn't the emergency room downstairs. Downstairs was chaos, blood on linoleum, and the smell of panic. Up here, on the 4th floor, medicine was a concierge service. You didn't just pay for health here, you paid for the absence of reality. You paid to not see the messy, loud, desperate parts of being human. Alara's job wasn't just nursing administration. It was gatekeeping. She was the filter. The automatic doors at the far end of the corridor slid open. The sound was a soft, pneumatic exhale, startlingly loud in the silence. Alara didn't look up immediately. She finished typing the log entry for room 404's dietary restriction update, hit save, and then raised her eyes. A man was standing on the plush runner rug that stretched from the elevator bank to her desk. He didn't belong. The realization hit her before she even processed his face. It was the silhouette, the posture. He was soaked through. Water dripped from the hem of a dark, fraying wool coat, leaving dark, distinct spots on the beige carpet. He carried a battered leather satchel in his right hand, the leather cracked and worn white at the corners. He was black, tall, and he looked exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Alara stood, her hands clasping together in front of her, right over left, her thumb brushing the faint, shiny chemical burn scar on her ring finger. It was a nervous tick she hated, but the sensation of smooth, damaged skin grounded her. "Sir," she said. Her voice was pitched perfectly soft enough not to echo, firm enough to stop forward momentum. The man took another step. He was shivering. Not violently, but a subtle vibration that traveled up his frame. "I need," his voice was gravel, barely a whisper. He cleared his throat, wincing as if the action hurt. "I need to get into the system. I need a consult." Alara stepped around the edge of the marble desk. She didn't move toward him. She moved to block the path to the treatment suites behind her. "This is the Platinum Wing, sir," she said. "The general admissions desk is on the ground floor. If you take the elevator back down—" "I know where I am," he interrupted. He dropped the heavy bag onto the floor. It landed with a wet thud. He reached into his coat pocket with his left hand. Alara saw the hand tremble, a distinct, rhythmic tremor. Withdrawal? She thought. Parkinson's? Hypothermia? Her mind instantly began categorizing risks. A wet man, disheveled, shaking, demanding entry to the most expensive square footage in the city at 3 in the morning. He had no wristband, no escort, no visitor badge. He pulled out a wallet, but his fingers were clumsy, numb from the cold or the tremor. A few cards spilled out onto the floor. He cursed softly, bending down to retrieve them. "Sir, please leave the items on the floor," Alara said, her voice dropping an octave. This was the command tone. "Step back." He froze, crouching, looking up at her. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites yellowed with fatigue. "I'm not a threat," he said, breathless. I need to see Dr. Aris. Is he on rotation?" Dr. Aris was the chief of neuro. He didn't see walk-ins. He barely saw appointments unless they came with a 5-figure retainer. "Dr. Aris is not available," Alara lied. "It was a reflex, and this department is by referral only. If you are experiencing a medical emergency, I can call a code to have you transported to the ER." The man stood up slowly, clutching a damp credit card in his shaking hand. "I don't need the ER. I need this facility. I can pay. Run the card." He held it out. It was a black card, heavy metal, the kind that usually stopped arguments. But Alara looked at the man holding it, the water pooling around his worn boots, the frayed collar of his shirt, the smell of rain and wet wool that was beginning to taint the lavender air. She didn't see wealth. She saw a stolen card, Or she saw a man who had spent his last dime to get into a room he didn't deserve to be in, who would cause a scene, who would disturb the senator in 402 or the CEO in 405. "I cannot run that card," Ilara said. She didn't reach for it. "Because we are at capacity," she said. Another lie. Room 406 and 408 were empty, and we do not accept walk-in payments after hours without pre-authorization from a primary care physician within the network. It is policy. "Policy," the man repeated. He closed his eyes for a second, swaying slightly. "Look, my name is Kalen. I have a history here. If you look me up, I cannot access patient files without a triage wristband, which you do not have," Ilara said. She reached under the lip of the desk and pressed the silent alert button. It didn't trigger alarms. It just vibrated the pager of the security supervisor. "You are trespassing in a sterile zone. I need you to return to the elevator." "I am not leaving," Kalen said. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them. He wasn't aggressive, but he was desperate, and desperation was dangerous. He placed the card on the marble counter. "Just run it, please. I am in significant distress." Ilara looked at the card, then she looked at him. "No," she said. The refusal hung in the air, absolute and cold. "I am the head nurse on this floor," Ilara continued, her posture stiffening. "My job is to ensure the safety and privacy of the patients currently under our care. You are disrupting that environment. You are wet, you are unsanctioned, and you are refusing to follow protocol." "I'm sick," he whispered. "Then go to the place for sick people," she said. "This is a place for clients." The distinction was sharp, a razor wire between them. The elevator chimed behind him. Heavy footsteps thudded against the carpet. Joran Holloway, the night shift security lead, rounded the corner. Joran was a wall of a man, smelling of the cinnamon toothpicks he chewed incessantly. He was breathing heavily, a wheezing sound that always preceded him. He saw the standoff and his hand went immediately to the belt at his waist. "Everything good, Ilara?" Joran asked, his eyes locking onto Kalen. "This gentleman is confused," Ilara said, her voice smoothing out, becoming performative for Joran. He stumbled off the elevator looking for the ER. "I've tried to direct him, but he's insisting on being seen here." Kalen turned to look at the guard. He held up his hands, the tremor in his left hand making his fingers dance. "I'm not confused. I'm asking for service." "Sir," Joran rumbled, stepping into Kalen's personal space. "You need to come with me. I have the means to pay," Kalen said, pointing to the card on the desk. She refused to take it. Joran glanced at Ilara. Ilara didn't blink. "He is erratic, Joran. He's soaking wet and tracking contaminants into the sterile lobby. And the card. The name doesn't match any incoming reservation." That was the nail. Whether the card was his or not didn't matter anymore. He didn't fit the pattern. Joran nodded. He reached out and clamped a hand onto Kalen's shoulder. The wool of the coat bunched under his grip. "Don't touch me," Kalen snapped, flinching. "Easy," Joran said, tightening his grip. "Don't make this a thing. We're going downstairs. Now." Kalen looked back at Ilara. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of shock and a strange, deep sorrow. It wasn't the anger of a customer denied. It was the disappointment of a parent watching a child fail a test. "You have no idea what you're doing," Kalen said to her. "I am doing my job," Ilara replied. She picked up the credit card from the counter using a tissue, avoiding direct contact, and held it out to Joran. "Take this with him. Make sure he doesn't come back up." Joran shoved the card into Kalen's pocket and hauled him toward the elevators. Kalen stumbled, his boots squeaking against the marble, his leather bag dragging behind him like a dead weight. Ilara watched them go. She watched the elevator doors slide shut, cutting off the image of the man's exhausted face. Silence rushed back into the lobby. Ilara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at the floor. There were muddy footprints on the beige runner, water spots on the marble. She felt a surge of righteous annoyance. She reached for the desk phone to call housekeeping. The lobby had to be perfect. The morning round started in 3 hours, and if the board of directors walked in and saw mud on the platinum floor, it would be her head. She rubbed the scar on her ring finger, the friction warm and reassuring. She had protected the floor. She had protected the quiet. She had followed the rules. She looked at her watch. 3:22 a.m. The incident was over. She picked up a bottle of disinfectant spray and walked around the desk to wipe down the spot where Kalen had placed his hands. She scrubbed hard, erasing the evidence of his presence, making the surface gleam under the amber lights again. She didn't know yet that the cameras had recorded everything. She didn't know that the timestamp on the video file would become evidence in a trial that wouldn't happen in a courtroom, but in a boardroom. She just knew that the surface was clean, and clean was good. The janitor's name was Kavya. She was a small woman who moved with the silent efficiency of a ghost, pushing a cart that squeaked only once every fourth rotation of the wheel. Elara watched her work. It was 3:45 a.m. Kavya sprayed a blue chemical foam onto the beige runner rug where the man had stood. The foam sizzled softly, turning white as it absorbed the rain and the street grit. With a stiff bristled brush, Kavya scrubbed the spot. Back and forth, back and forth. The rhythm was hypnotic. "Bad night?" Kavya asked, not looking up. She kept her eyes on the stain. "Just a distraction," Elara said. She was back behind the marble rampart of her desk, her hands sanitized, her keyboard pulled close. Someone wandered up from the street. Confused, Joran handled it. "Mud is deep," Kavya murmured. She wiped the foam away with a microfiber cloth. The rug looked new again. Heavy boots. "It's gone now," Elara said. And she meant it. The physical evidence was the easy part. The administrative evidence required more precision. Elara pulled up the incident reporting software on her dual monitors. The screen glowed with a comforting, bureaucratic blue. Incident Report Form 11B. Category: Security Breach, Unauthorized Access. Time: 3:14. Location: Platinum Wing, Atrium. She began to type. Her fingers flew across the keys, the mechanical clicking filling the silence of the lobby. She was fluent in the language of the institution. She knew how to arrange words so that they formed a shield around the hospital's liability. She didn't write, "A shaking, sick man begged for help and I turned him away." She wrote, "Individual attempted access to restricted VIP ward without prior authorization or medical referral. Subject displayed erratic behavior, consistent with substance withdrawal or psychological distress. Subject refused verbal redirection. Security escort was engaged to transition subject to general admissions for appropriate triage." It was a masterpiece of neutrality. It stripped the man Kalen of his humanity and converted him into a subject. It turned her refusal into redirection. It turned Joran's heavy hands into an engagement. She hit submit. The file vanished into the server, filed away under a digital number that no one would ever click on. Normalization was a process of translation. You took the messy, screaming reality of human suffering and translated it into data. Once it was data, it couldn't hurt you. It couldn't look you in the eye. By 4:30 a.m., the lobby was reset. The air filtration system had cycled the air 3 times, scrubbing the scent of wet wool and rain, replacing it with the synthetic lavender signature of the Platinum Wing. Elara poured herself a cup of water from the crystal pitcher on the sideboard. She took a sip. Cool, clean, tasteless. She felt a sense of accomplishment. She had held the line. The patients in 402, 404, and 405 were sleeping soundly, their high thread count dreams uninterrupted by the jagged edges of the outside world. That was her duty. She wasn't a doctor. She didn't save lives. She saved atmospheres. At 5:50 a.m., the shift change began. The morning light started to bleed through the massive atrium windows, turning the amber lobby a pale, icy blue. The automatic doors slid open, and Srena walked in. Srena was the day shift charge nurse. She was everything Elara was, but louder. She wore a lanyard braided from neon paracord that held an absurd number of keys, causing a chaotic jingle with every step. She was always chewing on a red plastic coffee stirrer, moving it from one side of her mouth to the other. "Morning, sunshine," Srena said, dropping her tote bag onto the back counter. "The board looks quiet." "Tell me." "Nothing exploded." "Quiet night," Elara said, standing up and stretching her back. Her spine popped, a sequence of small cracks. "Dietary change for 404. Dr. Aris wants updated vitals on 405 by 8. and we had a walk-in around 3. Srena paused, the red plastic stirrer still in the corner of her mouth. A walk-in? Up here? Some drifter? Alara said, checking her watch. Bypassed the ground floor desk. Security must have been sleeping. He got all the way to the rug before I stopped him. Srena laughed. A sharp, barking sound. Bold. What did he want? Drugs? He said he wanted a consult, Alara said. She began gathering her personal items, her phone, a small tube of hand cream, a pen with her initials engaged, claimed he had a card to pay for it. He was shaking like a leaf. I had Joran take him down to the ER. Probably stole the card, Srena said, logging into the terminal Alara had just vacated. You checked the name? Didn't bother. He was soaked. Looked like he'd been sleeping in a park. Good call, Srena muttered, her eyes already scanning the patient list, dismissing the incident entirely. Last thing we need is the senator waking up because some junkie is screaming about spiders in the hallway. You tagged the file? Filed and closed, Alara said. You're a saint, Alara. Seriously. Dealing with the trash so I don't have to. Alara felt a warm flush of validation. The trash. It was harsh, but it was the unspoken truth of their world. There were people who belonged in the Platinum Wing, and there were people who belonged in the dumpster behind the cafeteria. Mixing them was a contamination risk. Alara picked up her purse. I'm heading out. See you tonight. Go sleep, Srena said, waving a hand without looking up. Alara took the elevator down. The descent was smooth, the silence heavy. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the noise hit her. The main lobby was a different universe. It was crowded, even at 6 a.m. People coughing, children crying, the relentless beep of queue monitors. The air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Alara walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the hard terrazzo. She moved with the confident stride of someone leaving a shift, heading toward rest. But as she passed the double doors of the emergency department waiting room, she slowed down. She told herself it was just curiosity, just closing the loop. She stopped and looked through the glass partition into the ER waiting area. It was a sea of misery. People slumped in plastic chairs, clutching forms, staring at phones, holding ice packs to their heads. She scanned the room for the dark wool coat. She looked for the tall frame, the shaking hands, the battered leather bag. She didn't see him. She walked over to the triage desk. The nurse there was a young man named Davin, looking harried, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. Hey, Davin, Alara said. She kept her voice casual. Davin looked up, blinking. Oh, hey, Alara. Coming or going? Going. Listen, Joran brought a guy down here about 3 hours ago. Tall, black guy, wet coat, shaking pretty bad. Davin frowned, rubbing his face. Joran? Yeah, I saw Joran come through. He was dragging some guy out. Alara paused. Dragging him out? Yeah. Joran said the guy was refusing to check in. Said he was causing a scene, demanding to go back upstairs. Joran escorted him off the property, put him out on the curb. Alara felt a tiny, irrational prick of cold in her stomach. He didn't get triaged? Refused it, Davin said, shrugging. You know how they are. If they can't get the good drugs, they don't want the help. He walked off toward the metro station. Or stumbled, I guess. He looked rough. Right, Alara said. Okay, just checking. Have a good sleep, Davin said, already turning back to a patient who was coughing into a bloody napkin. Alara turned and walked toward the automatic sliding doors of the main entrance. She stepped out into the morning. The rain had stopped, but the pavement was still black and slick. The air was cold, biting at her exposed skin. She looked toward the metro station, a block away. The street was empty. He was gone. The system had worked exactly as designed. The anomaly had been detected, rejected, and expelled. The organism of the hospital had protected itself from a foreign body. Alara walked to her car, her keys jingling softly. She sat in the driver's seat and closed the door, sealing herself inside the quiet leather interior. She started the engine. The heater kicked on. She replayed the night in her head. She tried to find a jagged edge, something she had done wrong. She checked the mental list. Did I yell? No. Did I touch him? No. Did I follow the trespass protocol? Yes. She was safe. She put the car in drive and pulled out of the garage, merging into the early morning traffic. She turned on the radio. A soft pop song filled the cabin, drowning out the engine. She didn't know that 3 miles away, in a narrow alley behind a closed pharmacy, a leather satchel was sitting in a puddle. She didn't know that the man named Kalen was no longer shaking. She didn't know that the normalization she had just participated in, the paperwork, the cleaning, the ejection, was not the end of the event. It was the arming mechanism of a bomb, and the timer had already started ticking. She drove home, thinking about breakfast. She thought about how good her sheets would feel. She thought about nothing at all. The rhythm of the hospital was a circular thing. It didn't move forward, it just rotated. Elara woke at 2 p.m. to the sound of her blackout curtains rustling against the air conditioning vent. The light in her apartment was dim, gray, and timeless. For a moment, staring at the ceiling, she didn't know what day it was. It didn't matter. The roster said she was on, so she was on. She showered in water that was too hot, scrubbing her skin until it turned pink, as if she could wash off the feeling of the previous night's rain. She dressed in the dark, scrub pants, compression socks, the crisp navy tunic of the administration tier. She affixed her badge, Elara Vance, Senior Shift Lead. The badge was heavy. It felt like a shield. By 6:45 p.m., she was driving back toward the skyline that cut the city in half. The hospital complex dominated the northern horizon, a sprawling fortress of glass and steel that glowed violet against the dusk. When she walked into the Platinum Wing lobby, the atmosphere had shifted. Usually, the shift change was a casual handoff, muffled complaints about doctors, the exchange of gossip, the swapping of coffee cups. Tonight, the air was brittle. Srena was not leaning back in her chair. She was standing, frantically wiping down the already gleaming surface of the monitors with an alcohol wipe. Her movements were jerky, staccato. "You're early," Srena said, not looking up. She tossed the wipe into the trash and immediately pulled out another one. "Traffic was light," Elara said, stepping behind the desk. She placed her bag in the drawer. "Why are you polishing the screens? The cleaning crew comes in an hour." Srena stopped. She turned to look at Elara, the red plastic coffee stirrer motionless in her mouth for the first time. Her eyes were wide, rimmed with the stress of a rumor that had run wild. "You didn't check your email," Srena said. "It wasn't a question. I sleep during the day, Srena. You know this." "The acquisition is official," Srena whispered, leaning in over the marble divider. "The memo dropped at noon. The board signed the handover papers this morning. The Phoenix Group is out. We've been bought." Elara felt a ripple of unease, but she tamped it down. Corporate buyouts were like the weather storms happened high above, in boardrooms and penthouses, but down here on the floor, the work remained the same. Patients needed privacy. Forms needed signatures. The gate needed keeping. "Who bought us?" Elara asked, logging into her terminal. Her password flowed from her fingers. "Secure, access, 77. "That's the thing," Srena hissed. "Nobody knows the face of it yet. Some private equity holding out of Zurich, or maybe Singapore. Ethelgard Global. They're sending a transition audit team tonight." "Tonight?" "They're doing a blind stress test. They want to see how the facility runs when we don't know they're watching. Administration is freaking out. Dr. Eris has been yelling at the residents since 4 p.m. Elara looked around the lobby. It was perfect. The lights were dimmed to the exact lumen count specified in the manual. The scent of lavender was present, but not cloying. The runner rug, the one Kalen had dripped on, was pristine, the fibers combed in uniform direction. She felt a surge of cold satisfaction. "Let them come," Elara said calmly. "Everything is in order." Srena looked at her with a mix of envy and annoyance. "Must be nice to be a robot, Elara. I've got 3 unauthorized floral deliveries in the loading dock, and Mrs. Gentry, in 402, is demanding a specific brand of sparkling water that doesn't exist in this country. If the auditors see chaos, they cut staff. That's the pattern." "There is no chaos," Elara corrected her. "Unless you allow it." She took the handover. Srena left, her keys jingling nervously, escaping before the invisible judges arrived. Elara settled into the silence. The pattern of the night began to emerge. It was a pattern of enforcement. At 8:30 p.m., a delivery courier tried to bring a package up for the senator in 402. He had a clipboard and a weary smile. He wasn't on the pre-approved vendor list. "I can't accept that here," Alara said. "It's just documents," the courier pleaded. "He's waiting for them. Ground floor mailroom. They scan it, tag it, and bring it up. No direct handoffs." "It'll take 2 hours if I do that," the courier argued. "That is the procedure." She watched him leave. She felt the same small thrill she had felt the night before. It wasn't power. It was geometry. The world was messy, and she was the ruler that made it straight. At 10:15 p.m., Joran Holloway came up the elevator. The security lead looked different tonight. His uniform was pressed sharper than usual. He wasn't chewing his cinnamon toothpicks. He looked agitated, his large hands resting uneasily on his belt. He walked over to the desk, his boots heavy on the marble. He didn't lean in. He stood at attention, as if the camera in the corner was judging his posture. "Quiet night?" Joran asked. His voice was a low rumble. "Standard," Alara replied. She was typing a shift report. "You hear about the auditors?" "Yeah," Joran said. He looked over his shoulder at the empty elevators. "Everyone's jumpy. Management says these new owners are ruthless. They fire people for looking at them wrong." "Good," Alara said, not looking up. "Maybe we'll finally get some adherence to the visitor policy." Joran shifted his weight. He cleared his throat, the wheeze in his chest audible in the quiet lobby. "About last night," he started. Alara paused, typing. She looked at him. "The intruder?" "Yeah, the intruder." Joran scratched the back of his neck, where the skin folded over his collar. "I went to log the incident in the physical evidence locker. You know, standard procedure for the card." "The card," Joran said, lowering his voice. "It was metal, titanium, maybe. No numbers on the front, just a chip and a name on the back. A vanity card," Alara dismissed. "Rich people buy them online to feel important." "I ran it," Joran said. Alara stopped completely. "You ran it? Joran, that's a violation. We aren't authorized to run payment methods for non-patients." "I didn't run it for money," Joran defended himself, looking defensive. "I ran it through the lost property scanner, just to get a contact number so I could, I don't know, call someone to come get his trash." "It broke the scanner," Joran said. Alara blinked. "What?" The scanner froze. It didn't give a name. It didn't give a bank. It just flashed a code I've never seen. E1. Then the terminal locked up. Had to reboot the whole security node. Alara stared at him. For a second, a small, irrational crack appeared in her certainty. E1. It sounded like an error code, or a designation. "It was a glitch, Joran," she said firmly. "The system is old. That's why we're being bought. New tech is coming." "Maybe," Joran muttered. He looked like he wanted to say more. He looked like a man who had touched something too hot and was trying to understand why he wasn't burned yet. The guy, when I put him out, he didn't fight. He just sat on the curb, in the rain. He looked at the building like he felt sorry for it. He was high, Joran, or mentally ill. Disordered thinking looks like profundity, but it's just noise. Alara used her shut-down tone, the tone that ended conversations. Joran nodded, accepting the logic because it was easier than the alternative. "Yeah, you're right, just noise." He turned to leave. "Keep it tight up here, Alara. They say the auditors might be doing mystery shopper tests, sending in actors to test the staff." He stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Alara sat alone in the amber light. She rubbed the scar on her ring finger. Actors. The thought settled in her mind. Was it possible? Was the man last night a test? She replayed the interaction, the wet coat, the shaking hands, the demand for entry without protocol. If it was a test, she had passed. The test was, "Do you break the rules for a sob story?" Her answer had been, no. She had protected the facility. She had protected the integrity of the Platinum Wing. If the auditors pulled the tape, they would see an employee who could not be swayed by emotion or appearance. They would see a perfect gatekeeper. She felt a renewed sense of confidence. The fear that Srena and Joran felt didn't touch her. She was aligned with the system. She was the system. Around 11 p.m., a fax came through the secure line behind her desk. The machine whirred, spitting out a single sheet of paper. Elara picked it up. It was a memo from the transition team to all staff from Aethelgard Global Directorate Subject, Operational Standards. Effective immediately, all previous exemptions for VIP admissions are revoked. Strict adherence to admission protocols is mandatory. No exceptions. Order is the prerequisite of care. Elara read the words and smiled. It was a vindication. The new owners believed in the same thing she did. Order is the prerequisite of care. It could have been her own motto. She didn't know that the memo was a trap. She didn't know that the man who wrote it had written it with a shaking hand, sitting in a hotel room 3 blocks away, staring at a bruised wrist where a security guard had grabbed him. She didn't know that strict adherence was not a directive for efficiency, but a microscope. He was demanding they follow the rules so he could see exactly who used the rules as a weapon. She took a magnet and pinned the memo to the whiteboard behind her, perfectly centered. She was ready for them. She wanted them to see. The elevator chimed again. This time, it wasn't Joran. It was a group of 3 people, 2 men in sharp gray suits, holding tablets, and a woman in the center, older, wearing a white coat that was so stiff it looked like armor. She had silver hair cut in a severe bob. They stepped onto the runner rug. They didn't look at Elara. They looked at the floor. They looked at the walls. They looked at the air vents. The audit had arrived. Elara stood, smoothing her tunic. She adopted her professional face, blank, helpful, impenetrable. The woman in the white coat walked straight to the desk. She didn't smile. She looked at Elara's badge, then at Elara's face. "Night shift lead?" the woman asked. Her voice was dry as paper. "Yes, ma'am. Elara Vance." The woman tapped her tablet. "Vance, you were on duty last night? Between 0300 and 0400? "I was," Elara said. She didn't hesitate. She was proud of last night. "We reviewed the security log," the woman said. She looked up, her eyes gray and unreadable. "You denied entry to a chemically dependent individual?" "I denied entry to an unauthorized walk-in seeking concierge services without payment confirmation or referral," Elara corrected gently. "I followed the exclusion protocol." The woman stared at her for a long beat. Then she tapped the tablet again. "Protocol," the woman repeated softly. "Excellent." She turned to the 2 men. "Note the adherence. Rigid application of existing policy." The men typed furiously. Elara felt a glow of triumph. She was being recognized. "Carry on, Miss Vance," the woman said. "We will be observing for the next hour." "Of course," Elara said. She watched them move toward the patient suites. She felt safe. She felt seen. She didn't notice that the woman in the white coat hadn't asked about the man. She hadn't asked if he was okay. She hadn't asked where he went. She had only asked about the protocol. They weren't checking to see if Elara was a good nurse. They were checking to see if she was a good machine. And she was. The trap snapped shut, silent and invisible. Elara stood in the center of it, thinking it was a pedestal. The observation period lasted exactly 45 minutes. The audit team moved through the platinum wing like a singular organism, 3 heads turning in unison, 3 tablets tapping in sync. They checked the temperature of the saline warmers. They ran a white glove over the top of the door frames. They asked Elara to recite the fire evacuation protocol for bedbound patients in the C wing, which she did, verbatim, without a single stumble. When they finished, the woman in the white coat, whose badge read Director Sterling, Transition Lead, stopped at the reception desk. "Miss Vance," Sterling said. Her voice was devoid of inflection. "You are requested in the executive suite, immediately." Elara felt a spike of adrenaline. It wasn't fear. It was the electric thrill of acknowledgement. In the corporate structure of the hospital, being summoned to the executive suite during a night shift happened for one of 2 reasons: a catastrophic failure or a significant promotion. She knew she hadn't failed. The lobby was spotless. The protocols were ironclad. "Who shall cover the desk?" Elara asked, her hands automatically locking the console. "We have deployed a float nurse from the integration team," Sterling said. "He is already en route. Go." Elara stepped out from behind the marble barrier. She smoothed her tunic, checked the alignment of her badge, and walked to the elevators. She pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse level. The elevator ride was silent and swift. The pressure change popped her ears. When the doors slid open, the air was different. It didn't smell like lavender and sanitizer. It smelled of ozone, old leather, and the static charge of high-end electronics. The carpet was thicker here, swallowing the sound of her sensible nursing shoes. She walked down the long corridor toward the double-glass doors of the boardroom. The hallway was lined with abstract art slashes of red and black on canvas that seemed violent compared to the pastoral watercolors downstairs. She entered the boardroom. The room was vast, dominated by a table made of a single slab of black walnut. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grid of electricity stretching out to the horizon. 3 people were in the room. Director Sterling had somehow beaten her there, standing by a large screen at the far end. A man in a dark suit stood in the corner, arms crossed general counsel, likely. And at the head of the table, a man was sitting in a high-backed leather chair. His back was to the window. He was silhouetted against the city, a dark shape cut out of the light. "Miss Vance," the man said. The voice stopped Elara in her tracks. It wasn't the gravelly, desperate whisper of the night before. It was deeper, clearer. But the cadence was identical. The pause between words was the same. Elara stood by the door, her hands clasping right over left, her thumb finding the scar on her finger. "Sir?" The man swiveled the chair. It was him. He was clean-shaven now. The matted hair was trimmed close to his scalp. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Elara's annual salary. But the eyes were the same, bloodshot, weary, yellowed at the edges, and the left hand, resting on the walnut table, was still trembling with that rhythmic, unstoppable tremor. It was Kalen. Elara's mind stuttered. The image of the beggar in the wet wool coat collided with the image of the executive before her. They didn't fit. The cognitive dissonance made her dizzy. "Please, sit," Kalen said, gesturing to the chair opposite him with his shaking hand. Elara sat. She kept her back straight. She didn't speak. Her training told her to wait for the question. Kalen looked at her for a long time. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. He looked like a scientist examining a specimen that had behaved unexpectedly. "Do you know who I am, Miss Vance?" he asked. "You are." Elara hesitated. "You are the individual from the lobby. Last night, I am Kalen Aethelgard," he said softly. "My family's trust just acquired this facility, and 41 others across the continent." The name landed heavy in the room. Aethelgard. The name on the memo. The name Srena had whispered. "I see," Elara said. Her voice remained steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I suffer from early-onset Parkinson's," Kalen said, looking down at his trembling hand, "and a rare autoimmune condition that flares when my stress levels spike. It creates a feedback loop, tremors, disorientation, hypothermia-like symptoms." He paused, taking a sip of water from a glass on the table. The glass rattled against his teeth. "Last night," he continued, "I was coming from the airport. My driver had an emergency. I let him go. I decided to walk the last few blocks to the hotel. It started to rain. I had an episode. I came here because I own the place. Or, I was about to. I knew the Platinum Wing had the best neurologists in the state." He looked up at her. "I didn't have my wallet. I left it in the car. I only had the emergency card, the black titanium. Do you know what that card is, Miss Vance?" "I believed it to be a credit card," Elara said. "It is an override key," Kalen said. "It bypasses billing. It bypasses triage. It signals the central server that a director is on site and in distress. The code Joran saw? E1, Executive 1. He tapped the table. "You refused it. I followed the protocol for unrecognized payment methods," Elara said. She felt the need to defend the logic. The card had no name on the front, no numbers. It appeared suspicious. "And the man holding it?" Kalen asked. "Did he appear suspicious?" "He appeared. Compromised." Elara chose the word carefully. "You appeared to be under the influence. You were wet. You were tracking mud into a sterile environment." "I was dying," Kalen said. The words were spoken without drama, just a fact. "My cortisol levels were critical. If Joran hadn't put me in a taxi, which he did, eventually, after dragging me to the curb, I would have gone into shock on the sidewalk. I spent the night in an urgent care clinic 3 miles away. They treated me with a warm blanket and a saline drip. They didn't ask for a card. Silence stretched in the room. The air conditioning hummed. Director Sterling stepped forward. She tapped the screen on the wall. Video footage appeared. It was high definition, black and white, shot from the ceiling camera in the atrium. Alara watched herself. She looked small on the screen. Efficient, cold. She watched herself block the path. She watched herself recoil from the wet bag. She watched herself wipe the counter while the man was still standing there, begging. It looked different from this angle. From the inside, it had felt like protection. From above, it looked like cruelty. I watched this tape 4 times this morning, Kaylin said. I wanted to understand. Understand what, sir? Alara asked. Why you did it. I was protecting the facility, Alara said. She held on to that truth. It was the only raft she had. The Platinum Wing promises a controlled environment. If I allow exceptions for every person who claims to be in distress, the standard of care for our admitted patients collapses. I did not know who you were. To me, you were a threat to the sterile zone. Kaylin nodded slowly. Precisely. He leaned forward. The tremor in his hand seemed to calm slightly as he focused. That is why you are still sitting here, Miss Vance, and not being escorted out by security. Alara blinked. Sir, most people, Kaylin said, would have panicked. They would have seen a sick man and broken the rules. They would have tried to help. They would have called a doctor. They would have been human. He gestured to the screen, where the video loop showed Alara wiping the counter. But you, he said, a strange mix of horror and admiration in his voice. You care more about the system than the people inside it. You are immune to empathy if it conflicts with procedure. He looked at Director Sterling. She is exactly what the algorithm predicted. Sterling nodded. High compliance, 0 deviation, moral latency is non-existent. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They weren't talking about her like she was a person. They were talking about her like she was software. We are restructuring, Kaylin said, turning back to Alara. The hospital is bleeding money. We have too many exceptions. Too many charity cases slipping through the cracks. Too many nurses who bend the rules because they feel sorry for someone. He paused. I almost died last night because of you, Alara. But the system survived perfectly. You protected the asset. You kept the mud off the carpet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the black titanium card. He slid it across the table. It stopped inches from Alara's hand. I don't need a nurse who saves lives, Kaylin said. I have doctors for that. I need an administrator who saves the institution. He looked at her, his eyes hard and yellow. I am offering you a promotion, Director of Patient Access. You will control who gets in, and more importantly, who stays out, for the entire hospital, not just the wing. Alara stared at the card. The revelation wasn't that she had made a mistake. The revelation was that her mistake was the most valuable thing she possessed. She had refused to serve a black man who was the owner, and because she had refused him so perfectly, so coldly, he was handing her the keys to the gate. But, Kaylin said, his voice dropping to a whisper, there is a condition. He pressed a button on the table. The screen changed. It showed a live feed of the ground floor emergency room. It was chaotic, crowded. To save the hospital, Kaylin said. We have to cut the dead weight, the uninsured, the chronic non-payers, the frequent flyers. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. If you take the job, Alara, you have to enforce the new admission standard, starting tonight, starting with the ER. He looked at her. I was the exception that should have been let in, he said. But to catch people like me, are you willing to lock out everyone else? Alara looked at the live feed. She saw the faces of the sick, the poor, the desperate. She saw Davin running between stretchers. She looked at Kaylin. He was waiting. He was the victim who had become the executioner, and he was handing her the axe. She realized then that the normalization of the previous night was just a rehearsal. The incident wasn't an accident. It was an interview, and she had aced it. The black titanium card lay on the walnut table between them. It absorbed the light from the ceiling fixtures, a dense, matte void in the center of the room. Alara looked at it. Then she looked at the live feed of the emergency room on the wall. The position comes with a 40% salary increase, Kaylin said. He was leaning back in the chair now, his hands clasped in his lap to hide the tremor, but his voice was steady, and a seat on the ethics committee. You would be the youngest director in the hospital's history. Director of Patient Access, Alara repeated. The title tasted like copper. It tasted like power. Access is a finite resource, Director Sterling added. She was standing by the window, her reflection ghosted against the city lights. We have treated it as infinite for too long. That is why the hospital is bankrupt. We have been running on empathy. Empathy is not a currency. Kaylin nodded. We need a triage of the wallet, Miss Vance. Not just the body. It sounds cruel, but consider the alternative. If we go under, this building closes. If this building closes, everyone in this zip code loses their trauma center. The stroke victims, the heart attacks, the car crashes. They all die in the ambulance on the way to the next county. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. To save the many, he whispered, we must sacrifice the burden. Alara felt the trap closing around her. It was a logical trap. It was the same logic she used to keep the lobby clean, expanded to the scale of life and death. If she wanted to protect the real patients, the ones who could be saved, the ones who paid, the ones who kept the lights on, she had to cull the ones who dragged the system down. What is the test? Alara asked. She knew there was a test. There was always a test. Kaylin smiled. It was a thin, dry expression. He tapped a key on his laptop. On the large screen, the camera view zoomed in. It focused on bed 4 inches the ER hallway. A man was sitting there. He was older, perhaps 70. He was wearing a faded army jacket and a knitted cap. He was hooked up to an oxygen monitor, but he was eating a sandwich from a vending machine. He looked comfortable. He looked like he had been there before. Subject 89, Sterling said, reading from her tablet. Real name, Thomas Harlan. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. No fixed address. No insurance. He comes in every Tuesday and Friday night complaining of chest tightness. We run the enzymes. They are negative. We give him a nebulizer treatment, a warm meal, and he sleeps in the hallway bed until morning. Then he leaves. He costs us $12,000 a month, Kaylin said, in resources, staff time, and bed occupancy. Alara looked at Mr. Harlan. He looked harmless. He was brushing crumbs off his jacket. He is not in acute distress, Alara noted. He is using the ER as a shelter. Precisely, Kaylin said. And tonight, the ER is at 110% capacity. There are 3 cardiac patients in the waiting room. Real cardiac patients. They are waiting because Mr. Harlan is eating a sandwich in bed 4. Kaylin slid a phone across the table toward Alara. It was a sleek, heavy landline unit, connected directly to the internal network. Call the charge nurse downstairs, Kaylin said. Order the discharge of Thomas Harlan. Alara looked at the phone. Now? Immediately. The residents will object, Alara said. It is raining again. If we put him out, and he has a flare-up, then he has a flare-up, Kaylin said. His voice went hard. I walked 3 miles in the rain last night, Miss Vance. I was shaking so hard I cracked a tooth. I survived. Mr. Harlan has a jacket. He will survive. Or he won't. The silence in the room was absolute. This is the job, Alara, Kaylin said softly. You stopped me. I was the owner, and you stopped me because I didn't fit the rules. Can you stop him? Alara reached for the phone. Her hand hovered over the receiver. She looked at the screen. She saw Davin, the nurse she had spoken to that morning, walking past bed 4. He patted Mr. Harlan on the shoulder. It was a gesture of kindness, a gesture of weakness. She picked up the receiver. She dialed the extension for the ER charge desk. On the screen, she saw Davin stop and pick up the phone at the station. ER. This is Davin. His voice crackled in her ear. He sounded exhausted. Davin. This is Alara Vance, from the Platinum Wing. Alara? Davin sounded confused. What do you need? We're slammed down here. I am acting on behalf of the Transition Directorate, Alara said. Her voice automatically shifted into the command register. Cool. Detached. We are reviewing real-time bed allocation. You have a patient in hallway 4. Thomas Harlan. Mr. Harlan? Yeah, he's stable. We're just letting him rest until shift change. It's pouring outside. Discharge him, Alara said. There was a pause on the line. What? Discharge him immediately. You need the bed for the cardiac queue. Alara, are you serious? Davin's voice rose. He's wheezing. If I kick him out now, he'll be back in an ambulance in 2 hours. Or the morgue. Protocol says we hold him until saturation hits 98%. The new protocol, Elara said, looking directly at Kalen, prioritizes acute cases over chronic maintenance. Mr. Harlan is stable. His occupancy is unauthorized. Discharge him. I can't do that, Davin said. Dr. Evans won't sign off on it. Dr. Evans works for Ethelgard Global now, Elara said. Tell him the order comes from the penthouse. If he refuses, he can come up here and explain to the board why he is prioritizing a non-payer over a critical cardiac intake. She waited. She watched the screen. She saw Davin look up at the ceiling, as if looking for God or a camera. He looked angry. This is wrong, Elara, Davin whispered. He's an old man. It is a hospital, Davin, not a hospice. Clear the bed. Elara didn't slam the phone down. She placed it gently back into the cradle. She sat perfectly still. Kalen didn't clap. He didn't smile. He just watched the screen. On the monitor, the tragedy played out in silence. Davin slammed the phone down. He walked over to Dr. Evans, a weary man in a blue scrub cap. They argued. Davin pointed at the ceiling. Doctor. Evans rubbed his eyes, shook his head, and signed a clipboard. Then, Davin walked over to bed 4. Elara watched Mr. Harlan look up. She saw the confusion on his face. She saw him gesture to the window, to the rain. She saw Davin shake his head, his body language apologetic but firm. Mr. Harlan stood up slowly. He coughed, his body curling inward. He buttoned his faded army jacket. He took the half-eaten sandwich and wrapped it in a napkin, shoving it into his pocket. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just looked tired. Davin walked him to the automatic doors. The doors slid open. The rain was visible as a curtain of gray static. Mr. Harlan stepped out. The doors closed behind him. Bed 4 was empty. 2 minutes later, a housekeeper arrived to strip the sheets. Clean, Sterling said. She made a mark on her tablet. Kalen let out a long breath. He looked at his hand. The tremor was still there, but he placed his hand flat on the table, pressing the vibration into the wood. You see, Kalen said, the system adjusts. Now, a heart attack victim will live, because you had the courage to be the villain. He pushed the black titanium card the rest of the way across the table. It hit Elara's fingertips. Welcome to the directorate, Elara. Elara picked up the card. It was cold, heavier than it looked. She looked at the screen again. The bed was being remade with crisp white linens. A new patient was already being wheeled down the hall, a man in a suit, clutching his chest. A paying customer. She had done it. She had traded an old man in a wet jacket for the survival of the institution. It was the same choice she had made the night before, only this time she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't feel guilty. She felt a strange, hollow clarity. The world was a sinking ship, and she was the one deciding who got in the lifeboats. Thank you, sir, Elara said. Don't thank me yet, Kalen said, standing up. He walked to the window, looking out at the rain-slicked city. Mr. Harlan was the easy part. He was just a variable. He turned back to her, and his silhouette cut a jagged line through the room. The real work begins tomorrow. We are implementing a biometric gate system for the entire campus. No valid insurance, no entry. The doors won't even open. You're going to oversee the installation. Elara nodded. I understand. And Elara? Yes, sir? That nurse. Davin. Kalen pointed a shaking finger at the screen, where Davin was angrily typing into a terminal. He hesitated. He argued. Elara felt a knot form in her stomach. He is a good nurse, she said. He is compassionate. Compassion is a liability, Kalen said. Put him on the redundancy list. Fire him in the morning. The trap snapped tight. Saving the system required sacrificing Mr. Harlan, but maintaining the system required sacrificing the witnesses. Elara looked at the card in her hand. Director of Patient Access. If she fired Davin, she was no longer just following orders. She was eliminating the opposition. She was becoming Kalen. He has a family, Elara said, the words slipping out before she could check them. Kalen looked at her. The yellow in his eyes seemed to glow. So does the hospital, he said. Choose. Elara looked down at the scar on her finger. She rubbed it. The sensation was dull, familiar. I will handle the paperwork, Elara said. The choice was made. The silence in the room was the sound of a soul quietly suffocating under the weight of a title. The termination meeting took exactly 4 minutes. Alara sat behind the expansive glass desk in her new office on the executive level. The walls were transparent, offering a panoramic view of the storm hammering the city. The rain was torrential, sheets of gray water turning the skyline into a blurred impressionist painting. Davin stood on the other side of the desk. He held a cardboard box containing a potted succulent, a framed photo of a dog, and a stethoscope. "Badge," Alara said. She didn't look at his face. She looked at the biometrics terminal on her desk. Davin placed his ID badge on the glass surface. He didn't slam it. He placed it with a gentleness that felt worse than anger. "You know he came back," Davin said softly. Alara typed the command to deactivate his credentials. User, D, Vance. Status, terminated. "Who?" Alara asked, her eyes on the screen. "Mr. Harlan, the old man you made me kick out. He was at the bus stop for 6 hours. Security says he's been circling the building, trying to find an open door." "That is a security matter," Alara said. "Not a clinical one, and certainly not yours, anymore." "You've locked the doors, Alara," Davin said. "The new biometric gates, they don't just stop people from coming in, they stop us from seeing them. The glass is tinted, you can't even see who's knocking." "We are securing the perimeter," Alara recited. "Admissions are now processed digitally. It's safer. For everyone." Davin laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Safer, right." He picked up his box. "I hope the 40% raise covers the cost of your soul, Alara. I really do." He walked out. Alara watched him go. She watched him walk down the long corridor, past the abstract art, toward the elevators. She waited until the elevator doors closed. Then, she pressed the enter key. The system purged Davin's access. She felt a flicker of something in her chest, not guilt, but a tightening, a pressure. She told herself it was just the barometer dropping. The storm was a bad one, a Category 3 event, according to the hospital's new automated disaster preparedness software. She stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. She looked down. The hospital entrance, 4 floors below, was unrecognizable. The old sliding glass doors were gone. In their place stood the Aethelgard access portals, sleek black metal turnstiles encased in bullet-resistant glass. They glowed with a soft, menacing red light. Locked. The system was live. Alara checked her watch. 7:15 p.m. The shift change was happening. Davin would be exiting the building now. She turned back to her desk. Her monitor flashed a notification. Alert. Perimeter breach attempt. Location. North Vestibule. ID. Unknown. Alara frowned. She clicked the notification. A camera feed popped up. It was the north entrance, the employee exit. The camera showed a grainier, darker view than the interior cameras. Rain lashed against the lens. In the vestibule, just outside the blast-proof glass of the new gates, a figure was slumped against the wall. He was clutching his chest. He was soaked, his clothes dark and heavy with water. It was Thomas Harlan. He had returned, just as Davin said. The instinct to seek the place of healing was stronger than the logic of expulsion. He was gasping for air, his mouth open in a silent scream, his hands clawing at the smooth, seamless glass of the barrier. The red light on the gate pulsed. Access denied. Alara stared at the screen. "Go away," she whispered. "Just go away, Thomas." Then, the inner doors of the vestibule opened. Davin walked into the frame. He was wearing his coat, holding his box of personal items. He was leaving. Davin saw Mr. Harlan. Alara watched Davin drop the box. The cardboard hit the wet floor. The succulent spilled dirt everywhere. The framed photo shattered. Davin dropped to his knees beside the old man. He checked a pulse. He shouted something. Alara couldn't hear it, but she saw the cords in his neck strain. He looked up at the camera. He looked right at her, even though he couldn't see her. He began to perform CPR. Alara's fingers twitched. Davin stopped compressions and turned to the exit gate. He waved his hands at the sensor. He grabbed the handle of the door he had just come through. It didn't move. The doors were one way. Once you exited the secure zone, you were out. And Davin's badge, the badge she had deactivated 2 minutes ago, was dead. He was locked out. He was trapped in the glass box of the vestibule with a dying man, separated from the ER by 2 inches of polycarbonate and a line of code Alara had typed herself. Davin scrambled for his badge. He slammed it against the reader. The reader flashed red. Invalid credentials. He slammed it again. And again. Alara stood up. The tightening in her chest became a vice. This wasn't a security matter anymore. This was a murder in slow motion. She grabbed her desk phone. She dialed the security desk. Joran, she snapped. Joran, override the north vestibule. Open the gates. I can't. Joran's voice came back, sounding tinny and distant. System is in lockdown mode due to the storm. Director Athelgard ordered a full perimeter seal to prevent flooding in the lower levels. There is a medical emergency in the vestibule, Alara shouted. Her voice cracked. It was the first time she had raised her voice in 3 years. Open the damn door. I don't have the codes, Alara. The new system locked us out. Only executive level can override a code black seal. Alara dropped the phone. Executive level. She looked at her hand. She was holding the black titanium card, the key. She ran. She ran out of her office, down the hall to the private elevator. She jammed the card into the slot. The doors opened instantly. She wrote it down to the ground floor. The descent felt like falling. She watched the numbers count down. 4, 3, 2, 1. The doors opened. She sprinted across the main lobby. The space was empty, glowing with the eerie red light of the lockdown mode. The silence was absolute, a vacuum waiting to be filled by tragedy. She reached the glass wall of the north entrance. She was 10 feet away from them. She saw Davin. He was screaming now, pounding his fists against the glass. His face was twisted in desperation. On the floor, Mr. Harlan was still. His army jacket was soaked. His eyes were open, staring up at the rain, hammering the glass roof of the vestibule. Alara slammed into the turnstile. She jammed the black titanium card into the reader. Processing. The screen spun. Alara looked through the glass. Her eyes met Davin's. He stopped pounding. He looked at her. He looked at the card in her hand. Access denied. The message flashed in bold, red letters. Alara stared at it. She swiped the card again. Access denied. User unauthorized for perimeter breach. No, Alara whispered. No, no. It's the owner's card. It's the master key. She swiped it a third time. Access denied. A message scrolled across the bottom of the small LCD screen. Error. Biometric mismatch. Card holder, Kaelin Athelgard, not detected. Secondary user, Alara Vance, restricted from override during lockdown. The trap had a second jaw. Kaelin hadn't given her the power to break the rules. He had given her the power to enforce them. The card was a symbol, a badge of office, but the system, the algorithm, knew whose hand was holding it. It knew she wasn't the owner. She was just the gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper does not get to open the gate when the castle decides to close. Alara looked up. Davin wasn't looking at her anymore. He was slumped over Mr. Harlan's body. He had stopped CPR. There was no point. The old man was gone. Davin sat back on his heels, his hands covered in the grime of the floor and the rain. He put his head in his hands. Alara stood on the dry, warm side of the glass. The air conditioner hummed above her, smelling of lavender. The floor was polished marble. She pressed her hand against the glass. It was cold. She realized then what she had done. She had built a perfect machine. A machine that couldn't be bullied, couldn't be bribed, and couldn't be swayed by pity. She had removed the human error, and in doing so, she had removed the humanity. Behind her, the sound of slow clapping echoed in the empty lobby. Alara turned slowly. Kaelin was standing by the elevator bank. He was leaning on a cane, a new accessory. He looked impeccable, dry, warm. He watched her with that same scientific curiosity he had shown in the boardroom. The system works, Kaelin said. His voice carried effortlessly across the marble. He died, Alara whispered. The card. It didn't work. The card works perfectly, Kaelin said, walking closer. The cane clicked rhythmically. It protected the facility from a breach during a code black event. It prevented an unauthorized admission. It prevented a liability. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked past her, through the glass, at the body of Mr. Harlan and the broken figure of Davin. You tried to save him, Kalen said softly. He sounded disappointed. Elara looked at the card in her hand. Her fingers were trembling. A tremor, just like his. I tried to use the override, she admitted. I know, Kalen said. I got the alert on my phone. Attempted override. Vance. That was the final test, Elara. He reached out and gently took the black card from her hand. His fingers were warm. You failed the moral test, he said. You tried to be a hero at the last second. You tried to let the chaos back in. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. I failed? No, Kalen smiled. It was a terrible, genuine smile. You passed the functional test. You proved that even when the operator falters, the system holds. You proved that I don't need to trust you. I only need to trust the machine you built. He looked at the dead man in the vestibule. Clean up on the north entrance, Kalen said, turning away. Call the coroner. Have security escort the former employee off the premises once the body is removed. And, Elara? She couldn't speak. She could only stare at the glass. Don't let it happen again. Emotional outbursts are unprofessional. He walked away, the cane clicking, fading into the shadows of the hospital he had turned into a tomb. Elara turned back to the window. Davin was looking at her again. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked at her with a profound, terrifying pity. He looked at her like she was the one trapped in a glass box. And she was. She was on the inside. It was clean. It was safe. It was ordered. And she could never, ever leave. 6 months later, the Platinum Wing was no longer a wing. It was the standard. The Ethelgard model had consumed the entire campus. The chaotic, noisy waiting rooms of the ground floor were gone. In their place were rows of sleek, self-service kiosks that required a pre-authorized credit hold before they would even dispense a queue number. The screaming was gone. The smell of wet wool and desperation was gone. The hospital smelled only of ozone and aggressive cleanliness. Elara sat in her office on the executive level. Her desk was made of the same black walnut as the boardroom table. It was perfectly clear, save for a single tablet and a crystal pitcher of water. She looked at the monthly report on the screen. Revenue, plus 210%. Liability claims, negative 95%. Patient satisfaction, verified tier, 4, 9/5. The numbers were beautiful. They were the geometry of a perfect world. There was another metric, one that wasn't on the official dashboard but lived in the shadow logs of the security server. Denied access events, 4,300. That was 4,300 people who had walked up to the glass doors, encountered the red light, and turned away. Some of them walked to the county clinic 5 miles away. Some of them called Ubers. Some of them, presumably, died in their living rooms. But they didn't die here. And because they didn't die here, they didn't count. The intercom buzzed. It was a soft, melodic chime, engineered to be non-intrusive. Director Vance? The assistant's voice was smooth as silk. Mr. Ethelgard is here for the quarterly review? Send him in, Elara said. She stood up. She smoothed the fabric of her suit. She no longer wore the navy tunic of a nurse. She wore charcoal silk, tailored to be invisible. The door opened. Kalen walked in. He looked nothing like the man who had stood shivering on her rug. He was vibrant. His skin glowed with the health that only extreme wealth and preventative care could buy. He wore a suit that absorbed the light. He didn't use a cane anymore. The tremor in his hand was almost imperceptible now, managed by a cocktail of experimental drugs that cost more per dose than Elara used to make in a year. Elara, he said, smiling. He walked over to the window, looking out at the city. It was a clear day. The sun was shining on the glass towers. The numbers are extraordinary. We have optimized the intake flow, Elara said. Her voice was quiet. She had learned to speak in the hush of the boardroom. The biometric gates are operating at 99.9% efficiency. And the noise? Kalen asked, tapping the glass. The chaos? Eliminated, Elara said. Kalen turned to look at her. You know, the board is discussing a regional role for you. We're acquiring 3 more facilities in the Midwest. They're messy. They need cleaning. Elara looked at her hands. She wore a platinum ring now, on her ring finger, covering the chemical burn scar. It was a gift from the directorate for her 5-year anniversary. It was cold against her skin. I am happy here, she said. Are you? Kalen asked. He walked over to her desk and sat on the edge of it, invading her space with the casual confidence of ownership. You look tired, Alara. You look like you haven't slept. I sleep fine, she lied. She didn't tell him about the dreams. In the dreams, she was back in the vestibule, but the glass wasn't there. She was holding Mr. Harlan's hand. It was warm, and then Davin would look at her, and his face would change into Kalen's, and he would start to laugh, and the glass would slam down, severing her hands at the wrists. Good, Kalen said. We need you sharp. He reached for the crystal pitcher. He poured himself a glass of water. His hand shook, just once, a tiny spasm that spilled a single drop onto the black walnut desk. Alara watched the drop. It was a perfect sphere of water. Kalen didn't notice. He drank. Do you ever wonder what happened to him? Alara froze. Who? The nurse. The one with the dog photo. Davin. I don't track terminated employees, Alara said. I do, Kalen said. He set the glass down. He's working at a free clinic in the South Ward, a storefront operation. No funding. He sees 50 patients a day. He makes less in a month than you make in an hour. He made his choice, Alara said. The script was automatic. He did, Kalen agreed. He chose to be tired. He chose to be surrounded by misery. He chose to touch the sick. Kalen leaned in closer. His eyes were yellow and piercing. But he sleeps at night, Alara. I had him watched. He looks peaceful. Alara felt a crack in her armor, a hairline fracture running down the center of her chest. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because I want you to understand the value of what you have, Kalen said. Peace is cheap. Anyone can have peace if they're willing to be a failure. But order? Order is expensive. You paid the price. You should be proud. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket. I'll see you at the gala on Friday, he said. Wear something sharp. You're the face of the brand. He walked to the door. Oh, he paused, his hand on the handle. And Alara? Yes, sir. There's a spot on your desk. He pointed to the single drop of water he had spilled. You missed a spot. He left. Alara stood alone in the silence. The room was soundproofed. The air was filtered. She was on the top floor of the most advanced medical facility in the state. She was powerful. She was wealthy. She was safe. She looked at the drop of water. It sat there, defying her. A tiny piece of chaos in her perfect world. She reached out to wipe it away, but she stopped. She hovered her hand over the water. She remembered the rain on Kalen's coat. She remembered the water dripping from Mr. Harlan's jacket. She remembered the steam on the glass of the vestibule. She pulled her hand back. She sat down in her chair. She swiveled to face the window. Below her, the city moved like a colony of ants. People were rushing, falling, hurting, healing. It was messy and vibrant and alive. And she was up here. She realized then that the title of her life had been written the moment she stood behind that reception desk 3 years ago. She refused to serve a black man. She had refused to serve Kalen when he was human. She had refused to see his suffering because it didn't fit the code. And because of that refusal, the universe had played a cruel joke. It had granted her wish. It had removed the humanity from him and from her. She was no longer a nurse. She didn't serve men. She didn't serve women. She didn't serve the sick. She served the walls. She served the gates. She served the silence. Alara looked at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back was immaculate, composed, and utterly dead. She reached for the pitcher of water. Slowly, deliberately, she poured a second drop onto the desk, then a third. She watched them pool together. It was a pathetic rebellion. It changed nothing. The system wouldn't even notice. But for a second, just a second, she let the mess sit there. She watched the water until it evaporated into the dry, conditioned air, leaving nothing behind but a faint, invisible ring that no one else would ever see. Clean, she whispered to the empty room. She picked up her phone to authorize the next batch of denials. The silence closed over her head like water, heavy and deep, and she didn't even try to hold her breath. She just drowned. If this story lingered with you in the quiet moments after listening, I invite you to share it with someone who needs to hear it.